Welcome to the LivBtr podcast. I'm Erica Spiegelman, addiction and wellness specialist and author, and along with me, I have my co-host, Jay Siano, a New York-based serial entrepreneur, business scaling expert, and wellness aficionado. We are here to inspire, encourage growth, and most importantly, to live better. Welcome to the LivBtr podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Danielle Dick. She's a tenured professor of psychiatry at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, where she serves as the inaugural director of Rutgers Addiction Research Center and holds the Greg Brown Endowed Chair in Neuroscience. She's an internationally recognized and award-winning expert on genetic and environmental influences on the human behavior. She has led and contributed more than 20 grants from the National Institute of Health, and she's been named one of the most highly cited researchers across all fields of science. Her new book, The Child Code, was published by Penguin Random House and helps parents tailor their parenting to what would work best for their unique child. We are so thrilled to have Danielle with us on the podcast today.
Welcome to the LivBtr podcast. My name is Erica Spiegelman, and I have my co-host with me, Jay Siano, Mr. Jason Siano. And today we have on a very special guest. Dr. Danielle Dick is with us. She is an incredible human being that is pushing all of us to live better, and that's why we're so happy to have her on today. She's a psychologist and the director of Rutgers Addiction Research Center at Rutgers Brain Health Institution, and they do research in the genetic epidemiology of substance abuse and related behavioral disorders. They do such important work. And Dr. Dick also has a book called The Child Code, which is out now, which has such interesting research on how when we are children, how basically we could kind of begin to see, to personalize our parenting to tailor it to how our children are and their disposition, right, and their personality. So we want to hear more about all of this. Welcome to the show, Dr. Danielle Dick.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about, I was lucky enough to have a conversation with you many months ago on a different podcast, and your book had just come out, The Child Code. Can you tell me a little bit about how that's going and what your experience has been as a new author? And yeah.
Absolutely. So as you and I have talked about before, really what led me to write this book is that I've spent the last 20 plus years as a researcher, and I study, genes, environment, how they come together to influence all kinds of life outcomes. A lot of my work focuses on addiction and mental health outcomes, and a lot of my studies are of kids and looking at what do at-risk kids look like, what kids who are carrying genetic dispositions that might put them more at risk, and then what kinds of environments either exacerbate or help reduce risk as they're growing up. Because ultimately, we want to use the science to help improve lives. And one of the things that really struck me when I became a parent was how so much of the parenting messages we get from the world didn't match what I knew the science said. And so by that, I mean, one of the things that we just know absolutely 100% is that kids are not born as blank slates. They all come wired with their own unique genetic codes, and that influences their brains. And the same way that we can look around and see how we all look different on the outside, right? We have different hair color and eye color and body shapes and sizes and things that are genetically influenced. Well, the way our brains are wired are equally different on the inside too. And that influences why some kids are more impulsive or more fearful or more extroverted or introverted. And, as adults, we'll talk about things like, oh, I'm much more of an extrovert. And so, I love being around people, or I'm an introvert. And gosh, it's like pulling teeth to get me to go to, the work holiday party. And we think about how our natural traits impact our lives. But when we have our kids, very often we're just like, okay, great, game on. It's all on me, parent, now to mold this person into the dreamy little adult being I imagined them growing into. And it's as if we forget the role of, their genetic codes and their fact that they're all wired with their own, as their own unique little people from day one. And so this can put them more at risk for certain things. And it also means that when you are a parent, if you are intentional about understanding and thinking about how your child is wired, there's certain parenting strategies that work better or worse for kids who have different types of dispositions. And so the book was really a way to try and get the science out there to help other parents.
Amazing work. Isn't that amazing? It's just, I mean, we're nodding because we all have kids, all three of us, right? So, but
Yes.
it's just such, I always say this to my husband, it's like the craziest experience to watch these human beings become human beings and to really see what it takes to eat and to how to communicate. That's the stage we're in now. Like they're just starting to talk so much, and we don't have to worry about if they're going to eat or not. They eat, they go to the bathroom by themselves, so little things, but it takes so much. And it really is. I have two kids, and they're so different, and it's been so interesting in terms of trying to help them regulate and to create this emotional like connection with them in different ways because they're so different.
In my field, there's a saying that everyone is an environmentalist until they have their second child. Because with child one, you think, I read all the books, and either you're like, oh, my child is responding. They're doing great. I must be doing some A+ parenting here. Or, if your child is struggling, you think, oh my gosh, what must I be doing wrong? I need to figure this out. I must not know something. And then by the time you have your second child, you're like, wait, I'm doing all the same things, and this one is turning out totally differently and responding completely differently. And that's when you really start to realize, wow, they are their own people from day one. And that doesn't mean that there aren't important things that we do as parents, obviously. But a lot of that is helping shepherd them and teach them. And the idea that, the same things are going to work for equally well for all kids just doesn't match the fact that, they're all wired differently. And so they respond differently to us as parents.
Interesting, because when you kind of set up the background of the book and the premise behind it, it gave me a little bit of relief as a parent, because oftentimes, I think we're very guilty of putting a lot of pressure on ourselves when our kids are acting out, or when one kid's doing something right and the other one's doing something wrong, and you're approaching them both in the same way. It's very easy to forget that they're predisposed to certain things. And since I spend a lot of my time studying human behavior, it's easy for me to understand that certain consumer brands have this core audience as a demographic, and with the psychographics that look like this and so on and so forth. But I'm never really looking at my children that way. I'm kind of, when I see them do specific things, I feel like it's my fault. And, or my wife and I will be perplexed on, how they're acting and responding. And I think what you said literally like kind of unlocked something for me. It's a very interesting thing. It's so simple, but it's profound.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. That's definitely one of my core hopes in writing this book, is that parents will let go of some of the tremendous pressure that they put on themselves. And candidly, I think if we're all honest, we would admit that we have done this too. I know I have been guilty of it, which is we also can be kind of judgy with other parents. We see the child who's throwing a fit in Target, or the teenager who's talking back to their parent, and we sort of look at that, the way the parent is handling that situation and think that parent really needs to, and then, insert your favorite parenting advice. And then when it's our child who is acting out, we tend to internalize that, oh my gosh, other people are judging, or what should I be doing differently? And, in the same way that you can't control your spouse's behavior, it actually turns out, anybody who's tried to buckle a squirming toddler into a car seat, it's very hard to control anyone's behavior. Right. But as parents, so often we feel like it's all on us. And, one of the things I do hope that reading my book, and the reason I want to get this research out there does, is it helps parents understand that a lot of this behavior they see in their kids, and especially it's when our kids are acting out or they're struggling, it's that they don't have the skills yet. And maybe that's developmentally, or maybe that's because it doesn't come naturally to them. And that's why they tend to act out. It's not that we are doing something wrong as parents. And I think once we realize that, then we can shift our mindset to, okay, so maybe this is a child who is, wired naturally to being more explosive in terms of getting really upset, or really frustrated, or, really anxious or fearful. And so how do we now, instead of maybe kind of initially thinking, what am I doing wrong or what should I be doing, think, okay, how do I help support my child to learn the skills that maybe don't come to them naturally? And it's not always what our natural instincts are as parents.
It seems like it would be difficult. Well, difficult for me to be like, in this moment, he's so frustrated. Let's say my son, he gets frustrated easily. I want to teach him tools, how to deal with that frustration. That's naturally what I do, because I do this with my clients. Like, how can I teach my clients some tools to get through their recovery, right? That's usually my line of thinking for them. With my kids too, I'm like, he's 4 years old. How do I communicate? How do I use language for a 4-year-old to understand? Like, I say, let's take a deep breath, sweetie. Let's try and walk away from this. Let's play with something else if you're frustrated, But it's really difficult, I think, for us as parents to there's so many little steps to this, which is trying to give them the tool sets that they need so that they can navigate through their emotions in life. That's what our job is, right? Or,
Yes. And Erica, of course, your kids are lucky because you're trained to do all this. And in some ways, that was my humbling moment too, was to realize, oh, wow, this is my area, quote unquote, of expertise, children, right? And then when your child is struggling and you also realize, oh, it's very hard. Kids have a way of pushing your buttons. And it's very hard sometimes to naturally draw from even the skills that, in theory, I'm trained in and that you're trained in. And that's one of the reasons that the way I set my book up is, there's little short quizzes and surveys for you to fill out on your kids to figure out what their natural dispositions are. Because I think the first part is orienting to understanding where the behavior is coming from. Kind of, how is your child naturally disposed? What is their kind of temperamental disposition? And then, there's specific parenting strategies, like you said, kind of steps that work best for certain kids with certain dispositions, or that kids with different dispositions need certain things, different things. And so I find it very helpful then to kind of have that checklist, because sometimes also in the moment, our parents or our children can push our buttons as parents. And so that's why I kind of tried to structure the book with understanding your child. Okay, now here's kind of the strategies that work and sort of the quick things that you can remember to implement with kids in different types of situations. Because it's, of course, not just our kids who have dispositions. It's us who all have dispositions too. And so the way that your child interacts with you and interacts with the other parent or other adults in their life could be very different, because it's a different set of interactions between, people with different temperaments.
I wanted to ask because, we all obviously are different, right? Not just our children. And, I'm way more laid back than my wife is when we're, I have a lot more patience. I'm just chill. And oftentimes when, I think patience is a really difficult thing with kids, and to your point earlier, Erica, when your son acts out, I think younger me, when my kids were little, I had less patience. I was also drinking more. And a lot of this podcast, Danielle, is about, us all choosing to live better. And for me, I removed alcohol from my life in the last year. And I find myself with so much more patience with my kids. They feel that energy from me and everything is easier. And oftentimes I'm able to really hear them a lot more clearly and communicate with them. And I think speaking sometimes on their level and having that patience has been everything for me from a parenting perspective.
Connection. It breeds connection, which is what kids really want, right?
And I love what you were saying, Jay, too, about, of course, it's not just our kids who have room for growth and development, but all of us probably have some characteristics about ourselves that we love and think of as our strengths. And all of us probably have some characteristics that may not be the favorite thing about ourselves. And, for many parents, patience is one of them. And I am certainly one who, I have a child who is, prone to big feelings, and that apple didn't fall far from the tree. I am also someone who is a bit impulsive and also prone to big feelings. And so you realize that particular dynamic, when he got wound up, it made me get wound up as well, too, right? Our dispositions played off of each other. And that's when I realized, actually, it's both about teaching him skills, but it's also your kids kind of have this wonderful way sometimes of helping you realize, wow, there are areas here. And like you say, sometimes you look around at your life and think, wow, maybe I need to do things like cut back on my substance use because that's not helping my relationship with my child. And I need to be more focused on this now. Or, wow, I really need to practice more mindfulness or deep breathing to help me manage my strong emotions with my child. And one of my favorite memories is when I was one night tucking my son in for bed, and we live in an old house, and his closet door, which he wanted shut, so there were no monsters coming out, is on this kind of old rickety slide, and the door was stuck and it wouldn't slide closed. And it's the end of the day. Everyone's tired. There's been a long round of discussion about teeth brushing and book reading, and I'm at the end of my rope, and I'm trying to get this door closed. And I'm getting more and more frustrated, and you're kind of, now harshly trying to push the door. And this little toddler voice comes from the bed behind me and says, "Mommy, you seem like you're getting very frustrated. Maybe you can just take a deep breath and step aside for a minute." And I thought, wow, if that is not a case of my child is applying the skills that he is learning, and he now can recognize them and see that I actually need to be working on these skills in this moment too. And it was one of those just really both humbling and refreshing things where you think, okay, he is absolutely right. I need to practice those skills as well in this moment.
Challenge for I think for myself, and again as a parent, is we all have this idea of perfection, and we're all really concerned about them growing up in the most perfect way possible, and everybody around us seeing that we've raised such amazing children. And sometimes I take a step back and I look at them doing something that my wife or I might consider wrong, and saying to myself, he's 8. He's 11. Allowing them to be children. I think we strip them sometimes of that childhood, right? Like wanting them to act more mature, grow up, stop laying on the floors, get up, be more mature. Why are you doing this? Da, da, da. And they're kids.
Absolutely. In fact, we have really strongly changed the way that we parent in the last generation or so. And so we are far more hands-on with our children. We spend more time with them. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but children have far less unsupervised time to learn on their own as they did a generation ago. So we probably remember running around in the woods and you came home at supper time. And now, as they get older, they always have cell phones. And when they're younger, it's much more organized play dates, and there's virtually always a parent there. And that parent is often helping kids navigate. And the reason I raise all of this is because, as I'm sure you all know, rates of anxiety have really skyrocketed. And it's thought that one of the things that's contributing to this, and we see this a lot on college campuses. Obviously, I'm a university professor, and the number of students that we see showing up now, and you imagine what happens is when you go from this environment where you have had someone help scaffold all of your interactions with your peers and then with sports practices and then getting just the right grades and into the right college. We've done so much helping in the, helping our children achieve their dreams and, reach that sort of perfect state you were referring to, that then all of a sudden now they haven't had all those growth experiences of, I tried things on my own and I failed and it was okay. Or I was out with my friends and someone was getting teased and someone else stuck up for them. Or someone fell out of a tree and broke their arm and we had to figure out what to do and how to handle that situation. So trying things on your own and failing or realizing that was scary, but I got through it, are incredibly important growth skills. And when you don't have them little by little by little as you're growing up, and all of a sudden you're 18 and now you're expected to figure out how to get to classes or, get a job and live on your own and navigate all aspects of your life, we've essentially then tossed them off the deep end. And so I think what you're, and it's with all the best intentions from the part of parents, right? Wanting to help our kids grow up and, have everything work just right. But in some ways, we don't do them any favors by essentially our thinking so much about everything always has to be perfect. And we always want to make sure they're behaving perfect and they're doing everything right. That kind of learning skills or doing things that, got you into trouble or didn't do as well at school, and then getting that negative feedback. As parents, we're not the only ones who have to give feedback. The world gives feedback, and learning, oh, I got some feedback. That didn't feel good or that didn't work. I'm going to adjust my behavior. Very often, they learn much better from other people in that sense than from parents who are constantly trying to either protect or to be the ones to implement all the lessons.
It's so interesting. Yeah. I you have a worksheet that you have posted on your Facebook. I saw it and I was looking at it about it has a series of questions which can help you kind of like figure out whether you have an increased risk for addiction or anxiety, substance use disorder, I should say, sensation seeking people, right? People that are more impulsive. I was just going to say, I'm just curious because I work in the substance use disorder field and and Jay too, we talk about it a lot on the podcast. He's, kind of really taken on an amazing new chapter in his life where he's put his wellness, his mental, emotional, physical wellness, I think as one of your top priorities now, Jay. And I think it's been really
For sure, yeah.
been amazing to watch him on his journey. But Jay and I went to college together, if you didn't know, Danielle. So that's we met.
Oh, wonderful.
Big drinking school. And when I saw this when I saw your worksheet, it was really interesting because I thought about, wow, like my own kids, but even us as Jay and I were kids when we met, we were 18 years old, 20 years old, how many, we knew a lot of people that have substance issues from college. And, were we all individuals that were looking for more sensation seeking, were we, is that why we've all kind of, we're attracted to each other in a sense? I'm just curious about that. How do you see that in terms of groups? And
absolutely. Those are such great questions. So,
but yeah.
Yes, a lot of my work focuses on understanding genetic risk for substance use outcomes and what that looks like across development. And so we've been talking about little kids and how you can see their dispositions play out early. But one of the reasons that we study kids and early dispositions is because what we have found is, first of all, we know that our genes also play a role in why some people are more at risk for developing substance use disorders or other mental health challenges like depression, anxiety, or more serious mental illnesses like bipolar, schizophrenia. And So we're not all equally at risk, right? We're all born with different genetic codes. We're all at risk for something, but for some of us, it's cancers or cardiovascular diseases. And for other people, you have an elevated risk of substance use disorders or other kinds of mental health challenges. And so what we've been working on is, okay, what does that genetic risk look like earlier in development? Because if you understand how our genes influence why some people are more at risk than others, then that can help with prevention. And so I find that increasingly there's more recognition and understanding that genetic influences do impact addiction, which is a wonderful thing. But the number one misconception I still see is that most people think that what that means is that some people carry genetic factors that mean when they try a substance, they are much more likely to become physiologically addicted to it. That it's something about the way your body will respond to the drug that will mean you'll develop problems when other people don't. And there's a little bit of truth to that. We do carry some genes that influence the way our bodies process drugs, but that's just a teeny part of the way that our genes influence risk. The much bigger part is through these pathways that are related to, in one case, risk and reward. So this is some of us have brains that are just much more prone toward being really excited about trying new things and, what's in front of us that seems fun and exciting. And other people have brains that might think, oh, that sounds fun, but they immediately start thinking about consequences. Oh, what's this going to be like tomorrow or down the line? Or is this going to influence or help my long-term goals? And other people, their brains are like, this looks great, And when you see this in teenagers and young people, which the unfortunate thing is that most people initiate substance use in the teenage years, and the average age of onset of problems is in the young 20s. And teenagers, our brains develop unevenly. And so the part of the brain that is fully functioning when you are an adolescent is the part that is really primed to reward. And it's the wanting to try new things and what's right in front of you. And if you think about it, evolutionarily, that makes sense because, historically, you had to set out apart from your parents to find a mate. And, if we weren't attracted to food and sex and other things like that, we wouldn't survive as a species. So things that feel good, right, are good for survival. But the fact that you have teenagers now, substances are in the environment, they're fun, they, also increase those feel-good feelings. But the parts of their brain that are not fully developed till the mid-20s, is the part of your brain that really helps you think through long-term consequences. So when you're in college and somebody shows up at your dorm and says, hey, let's go to this party, and you think, oh my God, that sounds amazing, let's do it. You're not immediately thinking through, ooh, but then I might not get to study as much for this test, and I might not feel as good tomorrow, and so my notes won't be as good, and then I won't do as well in the exam, and my GPA won't be as good, and I really want to go on to be a doctor. And that's a lot of thought process. And brains that are not primed toward immediately thinking all that through, they think this sounds great, let's do it. And so developmentally, teenagers are at kind of a higher risk taking just based on where brains are. But then we all differ in these characteristics too. And so some of us, always, even once our brains are fully developed, are going to be much more novelty seeking, sensation seeking, impulsive, right, about things. It's just the way our brains kind of are naturally wired. And I want to emphasize, those are not bad things in and of themselves. Fighter pilots, CEOs, entrepreneurs, they tend to be much higher in risk taking. But those same characteristics can also put you in circumstances that make it more likely that you can develop substance use problems, because you're more likely to select other peers who are risk-taking, have more access to, and be in environments, parties, bars, where alcohol and other drugs are more prevalent. you're more likely to think, sure, that's fun, let's try it. And then depending on other environmental circumstances too, then you can also fall into a pattern where now drugs start to take on a certain role in your life. Drugs over time do change the brain, even with heavier, especially with heavier drug use. So, but that genetic disposition toward how your brain is wired toward risk-taking and reward-seeking, that is actually one of the ways that the genes that influence those things can put some people more at risk. And by understanding that, these traits show up early, right? You can see impulsivity, as I talk about in my book. You can see impulsivity from the time kids are pretty little. They're the ones that are dangling from the tops of trees and ending up in the ER all the time. And those are also the kids that are more likely to then be more risk-taking in adolescence, to seek out the other risk takers, to end up in these risk-enhancing environments. And by understanding that that is the pathway by which genetic risk can lead to problems, you can also see how there's all kinds of places where you can reduce the likelihood of developing problems, that it in no way means you're destined to develop problems. And so that is kind of one of the big ways that genes influence risk for substance use problems. And then the other pathway is via anxiety proneness. And some people are more prone toward worry, toward negative thinking. It puts one more at risk for depression, for anxiety. We actually see kids who carry those dispositions being less likely to use substances in adolescence because, adolescence substance use is social. And so when you have more anxiety or more depression, you tend to not be in those social situations as much. But as you get older and substances are legal and they're more available, then what we see is individuals who kind of have that disposition. Now you try a substance and you realize, oh, that anxiety is going away. I feel more normal. I feel like I can interact in social circumstances without feeling uncomfortable in my own skin. And that can be a pathway that can actually lead to later development of substance use problems. So those are two of the bigger ways that genes influence risk for addiction that have nothing to do with how your body processes drugs. And so that's what we're trying to get that information out so that folks can recognize that, because that also allows for earlier intervention. Because if you manage those traits that can put you at risk, then you never have to. No one is destined to develop problems with substances.
You said so much there. I mean, yeah, really fascinating. And Erica, I love the way that you position the question, because it's something that I've been curious about for a long time. And working on myself and always being somebody that was very attracted to feeling good, right? Like I was that guy. And later in life, I realized that by removing things that give you quick dopamine hits and being extremely mindful of creating those things in a natural way is how I live my life now. And it's so much more enjoyable. But it's scary, again, as a parent, to really look at your kids that you want to protect, understand, like one of my boys, I know I have my hands full with. Another one of my boys, I'm less concerned about, and it's exactly how you described. One is extremely social, running around the house with ski goggles on yesterday for no reason, nothing else but his underwear. And the other one is like sitting on the couch, like doesn't even know he's there doing that thing, right? And it's there. We can't wrap them up in bubble tape and helicopter parent our ways to their success, right? Which I think is very, very commonplace today, and I think, to your point earlier, that could actually work more against their development as opposed to helping them, setting them up for success when they go off to college or leave the nest for the first time. And the scariest part today is that there's things like fentanyl. There's, there's not as much room for error in today's world as there was when we were all growing up and going through those things. And that's the biggest fear of mine.
Absolutely. And I talk with parents a lot. And one of the things I say is, okay, so you can know something about how at risk your kids are. The example you just gave of the differences between your boys, and you can look at one and be like, oh, the one wielding the crazy goggles running around in the underwear, I can see him, at a fraternity party one day kind of thing. And so you know that about your kids. But there are things parents can do to reduce risk, and they don't involve bubble tape, as you said. So there's a few things you can do. One, talking to your kids, and it isn't a one and done conversation. So talking to your kids about substance use and having open conversations and starting earlier than you think you necessarily should. As soon as you start paying attention, you realize, gosh, from the commercials we see on TV to substance use in TVs and movies, even in Disney films sometimes. So it starts early where you can start talking to kids about what they're hearing at school, what's going on. You can use those as opportunities to start conversations about substance use. And if you have risk in your family, or you can talk to your kids about risk factors you see in them, recognizing, hey, not everyone can use substances in the same way. Some people are more likely to develop problems than others. Having those conversations with your kids as they are especially approaching adolescence and going to likely be in environments where there will be substances. In addition, as one of the things that we know is the most effective way to reduce risky substance use in adolescence is to monitor your kids. It's really important to have open lines of communication and to talk to your kids and have a close relationship and all of those things. But the top thing over and over again in research is adolescents need access to drugs to use them. And so making sure that if you have kids who are of age and you're going to bed early and they've got friends over, that there are not, a fridge full of cans where you might not notice if a few of those beers have disappeared, or decanters of, alcohol where it could get watered down with water and you wouldn't necessarily know. Knowing where your kids are and who they're with and talking to them about your rules surrounding substance use and what the expectations are in your home. All of those things have been shown to have a big role in whether or not kids use. And to not assume that all kids are going to use. In fact, substance use or rates of even trying or using alcohol have been steadily decreasing. Our kids are healthier than us in many ways. And national data shows that only about 55% of high school seniors say that they've used alcohol in the past year. So don't just assume that, everybody's going to do it, and so your kid will, and so I'm going to make some parameters around that, and I'm making this up. Like, for example, I'd rather have them drink in my house if they're going to do it anyway than drink at a party that's unsupervised. Don't assume that your kids will, because that's not necessarily the case. So there are things that we can do as parents that certainly make a difference. And when you see some of those traits in your kids too, so if you have the high sensation seeking kiddo, finding other outlets that fill that niche, that dopamine hit, as you called it, but that are not substance use. And so Iceland had one of the most amazing adolescent substance use programs where they had high rates of use in their youth. And they said, what are we going to do about this? And what they did was created all of these amazingly cool, free after-school programs where kids had climbing walls and fun activities where they got the things kids crave: excitement, socialization, interaction with other peers, and potential romantic interests. But there wasn't substance use involved. Unfortunately, a lot of where the substance use happens, it's kids who are seeking out these other kinds of activities, fun things, social interaction, and substance use then just becomes a part of those parties and things, but it doesn't have to be. So finding other fun outlets for kids with those dispositions is another thing that you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking as a kid myself, how no one spoke to me about addiction. No one spoke to me about, even the negative consequences to drugs and alcohol. No one spoke about it at all. So it's just so interesting now. I think not only has our generation shifted and it's changed, but I think now too, there's so much more communication about risk and communication just on being healthy. And there's so many more. I just feel like health and wellness in general, like my kids now know that word health. I say to them, these are little vitamins that makes you healthy. Eat your vegetables. It makes you healthy. It'll give you energy. I'm trying to like incorporate words that I never really heard. Even about a healthy diet. I was being fed, non-fat snack wells and things that, everyone thought were healthy back in the 80s and 90s. It's just things have shifted so much into like, I take my kids to farmers markets. They know what organic fruits are. So I think it's like all these teeny tiny things too, like in terms of us living healthy lifestyles, because my parents weren't living a healthy lifestyle per se. But I think it really, I don't know, I'm asking you too, do you think that is helpful? I would think so, just mirroring to them what it is to be a healthy human being. If health is important to us as individuals, as parents, is that helpful in that shift kind of?
Absolutely. Yes. And so I think it is so important that we talk about substance use and mental health and, healthy sexual behavior and other kinds of things with our kids in ways that our parents very often didn't with us. And it's almost funny when you think about how much we obsess when we have small children about what kind of bottles we're using or pacifiers, or is it good for them or not good for them? And very often then when it comes to the big things, right? Health, wellness, substance use, mental health, we really steer away from those topics. And that is shifting. And I think that's so important. And Jay, you raised something really important earlier, which is that we talked about some kids are more at risk and you really want to, make sure you're attuned to those kids. But the reality is the drug landscape is just far more dangerous now. And when I talk to adolescents, I talk about that and say, I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to provide you information so you can make the best choices for you. But the really unfortunate reality is that you all are in a really hard time right now because alcohol has always been in the picture. But now cannabis is so much more potent than it was. So in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 3% THC, the active ingredient. Now it is 25%. Edibles, which of course, who loves gummies? Teenagers, 80 to 90% THC. So this is an incredibly potent drug that has become legal much faster than we understand the ramifications. And because it has changed so much, many parents also don't even realize that it's, they think, well, what's the big deal, right? Everybody smoked a little grass back in the day. Well, that actually was much closer to grass. This is a potent drug. And we're seeing really adverse effects on memory and motivation in kids who start using regularly. Obviously, there's vaping, and you can have that laced with all kinds of things as well. And one vape has as much nicotine as a pack of cigarettes. And then, as you mentioned, fentanyl, which has come in from overseas. And now not only is it in the opioid supply, of course, with the opioid epidemic that created market demand for it, but it's cheap. It is, there's been exponential growth in overdoses, but now so many other street drugs, cocaine, ecstasy. We see kids who try something once. Experimentation is something adolescents very often want to do, but if it's laced with fentanyl, which increasingly a large portion of the product out there is, then, it can instantly lead to overdose and really severe situations. My friends in pediatric ER settings, are frightened by what they're seeing. So it's a reality that you want to talk to your kids about it, even if you think your kid would never be that they don't seem like that kid that is the, risk taker. The reality is, in this phase of life, they are really influenced by their peers and they like trying new things, and that is developmentally normal. But when you try that drug for maybe the first time and it's laced with something, that could be a deadly mistake. And of course, those are the things that all of us as parents worry about, and for good reason now. So those are important conversations to have with your kids.
I've really actually had multiple conversations with my boys about me even drinking, and they've been a part of me not drinking. Like so when people ask me, I'm very active on social media, things of that nature. And a lot of my content currently is about just being clear and kind of cheat codes to life as a result of just being clear. And they'll ask, like, how did you make that commitment? And the reality is, it's for my kids, it's for my family, it's for everybody around me, because they deserve the best version of me. And I truly believe that. And the day that I really made the decision, I actually said to them, I'm like, guys, would it be good? Would you be happy if I committed to you to never be drunk again in front of you, to stop drinking? And they're like, of course, Dad, like that type of stuff. So for me, it's like, I'm very curious to see how that plays out, because they've played a role in me promising that I won't drink to them. Right. Yes. And by the way, I wasn't this like bad, abusive parent. I was the normal, for middle age, 6-year-old guy that would go out drinking socially and whatnot. But you come home inevitably from that wedding and you're drunk and you're talking to your kids if they're awake with the babysitter. By the way, most of my peer group is drinking and doing other things in proximity of their kids. And that we could have a whole different podcast about that. But I think there's so many parents that are they don't put boundaries between their partying ways and what their kids are seeing them do. And from my own perspective as a kid, if I saw my parents doing something, it was acceptable. It was as if I could go and do that and there were no repercussions to it. And again, no judgment on other parents. Just for me, if I'm doing that stuff in front of them and they know I'm doing it, they don't always listen to what you say, but they watch everything you do.
Absolutely. And good modeling of behaviors, we know that kids learn from that. And when parents mess up, which inevitably we do, whether it's related to substance use or we yelled at our kid when they probably didn't deserve it, but we were mad at our partner or at work or something of that sort. And parents will say like, oh, what should I do about that? I say, you know what? One of the things we want our kids to learn is when you mess up, you own it, right? You apologize and say, hey, I'm going to do better. And that's a wonderful thing that you can model for your kids as well, too. And one other thought is that for parents who do drink, because they'll sometimes ask me, well, how do I tell my kids, my adolescents, that they can't? I choose to drink and they know that. So does that make me a hypocrite, or do I then not have as much authority to be able to tell them, well, you can't drink? And to that, I say, one of the things that you can always tell adolescents, and is a conversation that I have with my son, which is that the reality is your brain is still developing, and substances influence your brain very different than they do a fully developed adult brain. My brain's as good as it's going to get, and it's, probably slowly on the downward slide at this point, but yours is still developing. And the reality is that when you are an adult and of legal age, then you can make those decisions for yourself. But right now, my job as a parent is to help you reach your potential. And there is nothing more important to me than making sure that your brain is the best it can be to make the best decisions for you to get you where you ultimately want to be in life. So you can have that conversation with your child too. Even if you as a parent do choose to drink, it doesn't mean you have to excuse or accept that behavior in your kids.
Sure.
But absolutely modeling what you are, Jay, is, something wonderful for your kids to see and learn from.
I'm a work in progress, far from perfect.
All?
Doing our best over here.
Thank you, Danielle, so much for being with us today. I know that we've shared so many, you've covered so many, topics and so many great tips for everybody out there listening. It's awesome. We are so grateful. Yeah.
This really, I'm humbled and honored to be a part of this conversation with professionals like yourselves. And, I think that my part is really bringing this conversation to people who don't have the benefit of the access that we do. And it's really amazing the work that you're doing. I commend you.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such a fun conversation, and I really appreciate you all having me on. And just so you all know, or any parents who are out there too, I put a number of free resources for parents. I'm sorry?
I was going to say, please tell everybody where they can find your the worksheets, everything that you have, your book. Yes.
Absolutely. So I put a lot of free resources for parents on my website at danielledick.com. You can also find information about my book, The Child Code, and where to find that as well. So my background and impetus for doing all this is really to try and get research out to parents in ways that can help them on their parenting journey. So I hope you'll find things that are useful there.
Thank you so much.
I follow you on Instagram and Facebook that you're there as well. So
yes, absolutely. So
yeah, we'll post the links for everybody below.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Thank you.